Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our thesis forum, Relational Spaces, by Bloomberg students. My name is Judith Raganu, and I'm professor of architecture and urbanism at the Russell School of Design. I've been teaching in this program of design and urban ecology for 2 years, and I was fortunate to teach the graduating class this past semester. So we're here today to celebrate the graduation and their accomplishments in their thesis work, and to see some of their projects. Here is my colleague, Lydia.
Hello everyone. It's really wonderful to see everyone and come to this point. It's been a long work in the making. And my name is Evren Uzer. I'm an associate professor of strategic design and urban practice. I had the privilege to work with this cohort the whole year. So in the fall of 2025, I worked with Professor Dragan Trasimovic, and we pulled together this BUE Studio 3. And in spring 2026, I worked with Julie Dragano, and we were on the BUE thesis. So we have been very close with this cohort. And actually last year at this day, we met with them to start the kickoff of the first conversation of the thesis and what they're going to work on. But it takes a village to get to this point. There's a lot of people who have been contributing to this. We have a wonderful series of methods courses. So starting from first semester, Sarah Hodges, Lynn Lewis, Eric Rasford, Rafael Vargas have been teaching the methods courses, and we have seen that students have been demonstrating that knowledge in their thesis projects. Lynn just arrived on time as a professor. We have also had a lot of other faculty, Tom Andotti, Rob Robinson, Claudio Tomatero, and we had Esra Serkan Caroselis, who came to at different times during the thesis year and contributed in the reviews, giving feedback to our students, and there are countless others that were individually, and some of them are in the room with us, have contributed to this thesis work. So it takes a lot of collaboration and effort. And of course, last but not least, the families and loved ones have been supporting our students in this process. And this cohort, very close with it, they've been such a wonderful community and have been working well together. So we have a kind of a tight schedule, but we have prepared these presentations, and we have a little bit kind of fun.
Just to say, we have two types of thesis, as some of you know. One is the thesis track, which is more of a theoretical proposition, a proposition into a new way of thinking, and it's more of a discursive proposition, contribution to the field. And then we have the project-based thesis, which is like bringing something in the real world, actually an intervention, a policy framework, a social practice art project. So, and it's most of the combination of the two. And they all work very hard in using the research methods that they studied in the different classes. So they're all very much research-based, and they're all making a proposition, either a theoretical, discursive one, or one in the actual world. So today, the way we plan the event, we will start with a grounding exercise, which is orchestrated collectively by all our students. And the post-careful plan is designed by the students. We have then 3 panels, each of them in a different theme. In each panel, we have 2 students present their work for 15 minutes each, approximately. And then at the end of the panel, we have a conversation, and everybody in the room can ask questions and then say their opinion. And yeah, then at the end, we can have a collective reflection on what we can learn this year.
I have 2 things. One that I forgot, the one that now just thinking about. First of all, I forgot to mention, of course, Gabriela Rangel, our program director, and Miguel Restaurant also have been a part of both fall and spring about the reviews and contributions to the thesis. And during the whole event, we will be taking pictures. And if there is anyone who has any objection for these pictures being taken or them being used, please let Gabriela know. That was nice.
Because they will be published in social media. Yeah. So the floor is yours.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Wow, that's fun. So we did, over the course of the last 2 years, we have done a lot of exercises together as a cohort in the studio, and they've almost always helped us feel a bit more grounded in our work and a bit more grounded in the city, which can be, busy and chaotic. So we wanted to start off with one that all of us like doing, which is a breathing exercise. It's kind of, you hum like a bee, and it's called the Brahmi. My parents are regular yoga people, they can correct me if I go wrong. But essentially, I'm going to explain it and then we can get into it. The point is to hum completely to yourself without caring about the noises that you hear around you. So you're going to put your thumb to your ear and close your ear, and your four fingers will rest gently from above your eyebrow to below your nose, and you can close your eyes. And when I say 3, 2, 1, we're going to take a deep breath in and start humming whenever we feel comfortable to do so. We're going to do so for 3 breaths. You don't need my count for those 3. Once you finish your first hum, you can take another deep breath in and hum out. Okay? Let's go. 3, 2, 1. Hey, welcome to the DV presentation. I want to thank all of my DV leaders for having this sort of mutual support that I think we were all looking for. And without spending too much time, I think that we did the first panel.
We have Antonia Simon and Bruce Fleming on circularity and repair. First two presentations.
Hey guys.
I can't believe it. So happy to see familiar faces and new ones too. Bear with me, technology and all that stuff. Okay. I needed that breathing exercise. The old. Thank you, Sid. Sorry, Hey, hello everybody. My name is Ruth Montier. I am a Dewey second year student. Hoping to pass this. Graduate tomorrow. So today I'm presenting Learning in Motion. It's a circular economy education model for Brooklyn's everyday New York spaces. This thesis asks how environmental learning can move beyond niche programming and become something more public, something more accessible, and more grounding for community. Oh my God, don't let guys speak. Okay, so this is the overview. We'll be touching on various things like what is circular practice, my personal positionality, what that looks like in New York City, and what that looks like specifically in Brooklyn, where my case study lives, and also understanding the gap and familiarizing ourselves with the methods that I use for this research project. So what is circular practice? basically, it's introduces a framework. So basically, I'm sorry, so this framework, it takes away from this linear economy, which is what we practice every day in capitalistic society, which is you take it, you make it, and you waste it. But when it comes to circular economy, you make, you use, and you recycle. And recycling can look like, of course, doing something in a water inside a recycling bin, but it also can look like having a second life, like creating a plastic water bottle planter with a water bottle. So this is me. My research lived through lived experiences as a first generation American. I from Ethiopia, my family specifically from Aksum Tigray, where there was an actual civil war that was happening in the last 5 years. And that really made me question how things move around, how like clothing is processed and how like machinery and like waste is like approached during times of war. At the same time, I have a public health background. I also worked in FEMA for 5 years. And so with that outlook, I really wanted to like approach this and understand what like waste could look like in a way that is like more approachable. And so as you can see, there's like this little fish thing. It's literally like a tree bark that I painted, and I'm like, you know what? Why do these have to be so complicated? So this is me on the right. My passion and what I love to do for fun is rollerblade. I am a skate coach, planning on trying to sign up this summer. Yeah, and so this work carries the belief that knowledge is infrastructure, and everyone is a creative. I think a lot of times we kind of like disconnect from making and just always decide to consume instead, and we're just like, I'm just trying to say, let's slow down and hang out. Okay, so this is the gap. Youth infrastructure is shrinking while climate learning remains uneven. So since 2019 and 2025, there's been like a rapid decline in after school youth programming. And so for me, I was trying to figure out how we could find this connection to youth and circular practice. And like you saw before, I love creating, and I'm just trying to understand how we can get everybody into this conversation, especially our youth who are inheriting a climate crisis that they never even had a decision on. And so, yeah, circularity, circular economy practice exists in New York City, but they're in silos. As you can see, it's in like northern Brooklyn and like Manhattan area. So I'm just like, how do we get to people? How do we meet people where they're at? And so circular practice keeps materials and skills and resources in use instead of treating them as disposable, like we talked about. So that includes repair, reuse, climate, environmental justice, and arts and culture. So my research question, I kind of touched on it, is how can mobility transfer, how can we get environmental education outside of niche programming? So we agree that it exists, we see it through the mapping, but how do we bring it to East Brooklyn? How do we bring it to Canarsie, specifically Flatbush area? And so, I'm sorry, that is like what we're going to be diving into in terms of like spatial injustice and understanding what that reach would look like through mobility. And so the framework that I was following was climate justice, like why the work matters, mobility as access, civic infrastructure, where the work happens, and commenting how the work is shared. Vizu moves between public institutions and community-related practices. So finding that intersection between all of them. And so, like I said, this is basically a zoom in of what Brooklyn looks like within the circular economy landscape. As you can see, there are existing organizations like Fast Scrap, who's in Sunset Park, and they are like a reuse warehouse textile nonprofit organization where they like get about like they work with 800 different brands and get like 7,000 pounds of like fabric weekly, and they're solely run on volunteers. And I actually had a chance to intern with them my first semester last year, and all I was wondering was like, why are more kids involved in this? Like, how can we engage like field trips and, you know, site visits, or even making, site visits to the schools and having these type of workshops. And yeah, so that's kind of like where this like was born, really out of like curiosity of like how we can connect those organizations to community. And yeah, Sure We Can also is an amazing community-based organization that specifically works with like plastic and waste, and also, well, I don't have it blown out, but there's also Grow House NYC, which is a community land trust in Bed-Stuy that is basically a fixed location for people to have workshops like this, and we'll kind of touch on that first, yeah. So let's get into it. This is totally doable, what I just said, like connecting the dots between these organizations and departments. Like there are 4 agencies, and the one problem is they're not connecting to each other. So like, for example, the Mayor Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, they don't have any pathway to community organizations. Like, why not? You know, there are 62 branches at 62 library branches, but yet they're not so connected to climate justice practices. And again, going to like the Department of Youth and Community Development, funding is there. They actually are trying to incentivize different programming to happen, but environmental education doesn't live in that. Just like science and art, but that is like very siloed in their curriculum. And of course, like the Department of Sanitation, like where you guys at? Let's figure out some internships. I don't know. I'm just like, it's bureaucracy, you know, and what does it look like to actually come together and work on a cause? Anyhow, so who gets to participate in the circular economy? So this map basically shows that youth under 18 reside in the darker shades of the map, and the gray dots are essentially just like the typical after-school programming that lives there. And then the colored ones are basically those niche programmings that I was discussing. And so I was like really kind of gaslighting myself when I was looking at this map, like this cannot be true after like seeing even the comparison to the Brooklyn organizations that could be doing the work. And this is the way it looks through data. I was just like, okay, something must be done, you know? So here we try. So basically within my research, like I took shape from like the very beginning, when it comes to like workshopping, what I've been describing as low barrier, entry points to sustainable practices was over at Prospect Farms with my amazing professor, Tom and Gotti. Yeah. 5 minutes. Okay. So, yeah, Tom and Gotti, icon, and we had key partners. Well, him and his community basically have a community garden, and I was able to have a workshop event where we did patchworking, and we also made we propagated plants, and then we also made water bottle planters. And again, like obviously, like this is like the most obvious thing, but sometimes for a lot of people it's not, and that's what we'll get into. Okay, also I had the chance to like talk to different organizations like Anybag, who is a single plastic waste company that resides in Manhattan. And they literally like partner with like Marc Jacobs and Ralph Lauren and basically like build these like tote bags out of single-use waste bags, which is crazy. And it just felt really full circle for me because before I came to Parsons, I was like so intrigued by these. Like I said, like the war was happening, and I was like, oh my God, what can I do? What's out there? And so it's been like a very much a full circle moment for me. Okay, sorry. So the methodology, yeah, like I said, mapping, interviews, pilot workshops, surveys. Let's get to the workshops though. Okay, sorry. So these are the BIZU activation routes. So I had a chance to work with the libraries and we'll see that, but essentially I worked with about 7 different Brooklyn libraries, and this came out of like a cold email, literally out of interest of seeing how I could just have like a, what is it called, like a participatory workshop, like an informal workshop at their library, and it just kind of opened up to this amazing opportunity that we're gonna get into because I only have like so much time. Okay.
स्पोर्ट्स हमने तो नहीं पढ़ी किया, ये तो हिंदुस्तान ने पढ़ी किया।
Oh my God, they must love it. So, anyways, I'm sorry, I kind of jumped the gun over here, but essentially when working with these libraries, I was able to have insight in different age groups and like who was more interested in what. So basically within these zines, it's circulating, right? Are you guys looking at this stuff? Okay, cool. The zine is a work in progress. Okay, I'm sorry, we're working on that zine. Okay, but essentially, we did get this. I did get the zine out. Okay, it needs to be worked on, but it was just a basic way to conceptualize like what everyday life looks like when we're extracting, and what are ways that we could like cultivate different things to make in our own homes, you know. And so this over here was in Canarsie, the video that was just playing, and there were like 43 kids, and it was amazing. And these are the water bottles that they produced, and they came in like sections, not sections, groups. And this photo over here of me, that's at Climate Teen Night, and I made these small cardboard weaving pallets as like a cup holder. We're big weavers in our program, just so you know. I don't know if Zola is here. No, she's not. She is. Oh, okay, sorry. So, and it's a thing. It's our culture. It's due. Okay, and so this is where we're at with this. I'm sorry. Let's continue. What the pilot revealed to me when working with these different organizations was that the youth are interested, right? Like I only got that reply from the youth coordinator, the youth coordinator, because there was a need there and it opened up a plethora of opportunities. And so again, the propagation, like people are so interested in that more than the weaving. Actually, I sent in like a proposal to the libraries, and they were eating this water bottle propagation up. I was like, whoa, like you can do this, you guys can do this, but I mean, I'm happy to do it, you know? So anyways, 1 minute left. The point is making things complicated. People need entry points to be able to talk about sustainability and how to engage in our environment. And like a lot of times it gets so big, it gets so lofty. And I'm like, well, how do we invite people in, you know, instead of pushing people out in what we see, and that's happening in Brooklyn right now, for example. And we'll see more of that as the ladies present. Yeah, sorry, it's not loading. Hello? And basically that's the energy, guys. That's what I've been working on. There's a prototype if this decides to leak. Okay, I'm sorry. Oh, it's not okay. Okay, here we are. So you know what? I've been traveling with this laundry cart, guys. I need help. If you guys know anybody that can support this local cart, I want to make this come to life so we can have more informal ways of engaging with community about sustainability, climate justice. This is climate justice, right? Like environmental education, like we all have an idea of it. But what does it look like to go to the disinvested neighborhoods of Brooklyn and engage with them in a way that provides justice and equity? Hello. Okay, so last thing, I swear. Okay, so I don't want to do this by myself, and I can't do this by myself. And the bandwidth and my limitations have been so real. I don't know if you guys can tell. And so I'm asking you, the community, the people, to come together with me in order to start a co-op, essentially. That's what I'm saying. Like, we have to be in this together. And so each corridor within, like, the network of Brooklyn can have these, like, bike parks and have these community, like, gardens to be able to have these connections, these libraries. And so yeah, that's basically that, guys. I hope you understood what I was trying to set down. Here we are. The wars persist, but so do I.
Thank you so much, Ruth. You persevered, and we're gonna talk a little bit, the questions will come, so hold on to them. You have the panel, you can pose them to Ruth, and Abdurrahman can you present.
It's an aerospace and I think
Yeah.
there's another one.
Company's thesis and slow circuits, looking into E-based and for practice-based project.
Hey, this is why they tell you to test for presenting. I'm gonna be handing around some zines that we created through the process, as well as some stickers, some weaving. As Ruth said, we love to weave. But today I'm going to be sharing my thesis research, slow circuits, repair as a counterpractice to digital organisms. So I was drawn to this field of inquiry when I first arrived in New York. I was picking up my New York step, taking the subway, getting around on e-bikes, which have increasingly become very popular. And I started to notice that my everyday urban life is increasingly reliant on digital infrastructure. But I also became aware of sites like this: old TV monitors, screens, keyboards, AirPods, all scattered across New York sidewalks. I came to learn that New York produces over 400,000 tons of electronic waste a year. And coming from Hong Kong, a city that shares a coastline with what was the world's waste capital, I knew waste doesn't disappear. It washes up on a beach that someone calls home. And so that made me wonder, in the expedient rollout of digital services, what are the negative socio and ecological impacts of digital urbanism? And so the research began. I learned that over the last 2 decades, new digital expanded. Bloomberg administration's introduction of Wi-Fi hotspots to de Blasier's introduction of Lincoln Waste. More and more of the city's public services are shifting online. And 60% are developed through public-private partnerships. So with companies building and managing New York's public services, it begs the question, how public are these services? And if we take Link NYC, for example, a Google subsidiary, Sidewalks Lab, is one of the primary investors in its development, which means that within 150 feet of its buffer zone, your name, your device movements are all monitored. You might ask why that matters. Well, if we look at the arrest rates that occur within that 150-foot buffer zone, you'll see that around 13% of all New York arrests occur in that area. And in years like 2024, percent increase in arrests after the NYCs were introduced. So there's surveillance risk within this increasing digital infrastructure. But meanwhile, digital divide gaps haven't closed. Approximately 30% of New York households still lack mobile and home broadband services. And so this has led to a growing number of New Yorkers navigating the city by phone, on expensive devices that are often designed to break. With few recycling drop-off locations, New Yorkers end up hoarding a lot of their e-waste or throwing it away. So like 80% of Americans hoard electronic waste and only 22% end up being recycled. So herein lies the paradox that New Yorkers are living through. The same digital infrastructures that require you to participate in everyday urban life produce social harms like surveillance, dependency, and extraction, and also ecological harms. But these remain very unseen within the conversation around innovation and digital urbanism. And so when looking at existing scholarship, there have been a lot of efforts to understand the privatization of public good, the social impacts as well as the ecological impacts, but they haven't been brought together under the banner of digital urbanism. And so my contribution was really looking at bringing these disciplines together and also thinking about how growing scholarship and activism on repairing these social harms and ecological harms are pointing towards a different kind of form of urbanism, something that I coin as digital urban ecologies. And it's in this paradigm where three modalities of repair emerge. The first is maintenance, reconfiguration, and reappropriation. And so in the thesis, I'll talk a little bit about what that means, but repair emerges as a counter practice to top-down neoliberal digital urbanism, reshaping digital urbanism towards socio-ecological justice, promoting circularity, self-determination, and collective stewardship, all the things that we've just took us through. So focusing on technology repair as a counter practice to move towards digital urban ecologies. So how did I do this? I did a lot of ethnographic research, which included going to e-waste events, meeting Kendall, my partner in this project, conducting interviews, repair events, but also doing some spatial analysis and data visualization, which you've already seen. In addition to doing some case study and policy analysis to understand how are digital ecologies already at work in different cities, but also within New York. Looking again under repair as maintenance, repair as reconfiguration, repair as reappropriation. And then finally, which is kind of the main contribution of this work, is creating three different design interventions. The first is Slow Circuits Library. The second is a weaving workshop, and the last is a policy recommendation. So I'll go into that now. So starting off with the Slow Circuits Library, this was developed alongside e-waste expert Kendall Coleman, who's sitting in the crowd today. So we met at one of these e-waste events the Lower East Side Ecology Center was hosting, and we really wanted to create more of a circular model around how people access technology and how they can access it more collectively. So in partnership with Walter, we take devices that otherwise would be sent to the landfill, repair them, and then bring them into our libraries. And our library is located at Fix It with Peggy, a digital repair and learning hub up in the Bronx, where residents now can rent tech for free, they can repair them and also recycle their devices. And so we did this through a co-design process where Fix It with Peggy founder Ashonda, she and her interns, as well as one of her also high school interns, they all helped shape what the library would look like in practice. So what your experience would be when you came through their doors, to using a device checkout platform, to renting it and returning it. And again, this is an example of desire-based design. So really designing with communities instead of coming in from the outside, and making sure that it actually functions in the way that they want. So here you can see that the library was launched in the 1st of April, and we're continuing to iterate and learn from how the library is functioning. But we also use this desire-based method for a weaving social circle workshop, which you'll see the outcome through the little posters that are being handed around. But in this participatory weaving circle, participants would weave with discarded electronic wires. And we had a conversation around where technology comes from, the extraction that occurs at its provenance, also the extraction that occurs when it's in their hands, and then where tech goes in the afterlife. And so we looked into things like the extraction corridors for the lithium battery. So cobalt is the main component in a battery, and 70% comes from the DRC. So we looked at how, like, this design might originate in California, but then the extraction occurs in the DRC. Then a lot of components are then assembled and built in China, and then they're delivered to New York. But the ecological impact doesn't stop there. After we use our devices and they break because of planned obsolescence, a lot of that waste doesn't stay within New York. It's exported to the urban periphery, to places like New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and South Carolina. And the picture in the top right corner is an image of one of the waste plants, the Covanta waste plant, which is emitting pink smoke. And it's a significant health concern for the iron-bound community in New Jersey, but it's also linked to iodine, which is one of the component products in our screens. So we're seeing how, like, electronic waste is really having this, almost metabolic impact of, instead of those negative externalities being seen in the city, they're exported elsewhere. And so this was kind of the context of how we began the discussion for our workshop. But we also wanted to give people, a lot of time to think about the circuits that we want. So how do we want technology to exist in our life? And so people came up with really creative ideas. They thought about, how could we introduce a model where we only pay for our phones based on how much we use? Or could we turn, tech companies into nonprofits? Or what if we could do some onboarding settings so that our devices could be fit to our needs? And so in that context, we were kind of prefiguring what kind of paradigm we want with technology. And in that effort, this leads me to my next design intervention, which is a policy recommendation to look at how we could bring the slow circuits model to the rest of New York City through the New York Public Library system, so that any New Yorker can walk into a library and rent, repair, and recycle their devices within community institutions like the public library. And so all of this research kind of culminates in a design framework for digital urban ecologies. And so these different principles kind of led me to realize that, one, you have to see kind of the social and ecological impacts of tech in tandem. One that sees repair as something that goes beyond kind of a compensation policy, but more towards changing kind of the structural conditions that create those issues in the first place. Principles that require transformation of relationships, not just objects, so that, we're all stewards of the objects that we own. And then also how we can develop independent ownership of our devices, as well as ensuring that communities are at the heart of designing the technology that they want. So in terms of future research, I'd say the limitation of this is that I've cast a really big net. And so there's areas where I think require more scrutiny, more attention and care. But I think that's also an exciting place to come in, fellow researchers, or, people that are interested in learning more. I think there are a lot of avenues that this research can develop off of. So I've identified a few of them here, but also to say that this work is continuing. Slow Circuits is going to be hosting some workshops at the Greenpoint Public Library in the summer. We also hope to continue developing libraries across New York. But yeah, that kind of brings me to the end, and I'll leave you with a quote, which is an extract from Research's Ceremony by Sean Wilson. "This machine here is made from Mother Earth. It has a spirit of its own. The spirit probably hasn't been recognized and given the right respect it should. When we work in a world of automated things, we forget. Everything is sacred, and that includes what we make."
I will have now Ruth and Antonia this month goes to some conversation and some questions. And Antonia spared a little bit of minutes for us to have a question or more extra. Yeah. Congratulations to both of you. You have done an amazing work in the past year. And I, despite seeing this work for about more than a year, I still have some questions that I want to ask. And I will open to also to the audience any clarifying question that you might have at this point. But I want to start a little bit from the relations and partnerships that we have developed during this work, and maybe in two parts. One is, you can tell us how did you, first of all, a shout out to public libraries. Like, public structure, we still rely on, it still comes on, bringing in how much support they're giving to our communities is very visible. And it also appears in your analysis of the current conditions and what we are looking for. So Ruth, you're looking at a gap that has been widened during the time that you reviewed your life, and also as you were looking into this. And for you, we're looking into electronic waste and technology, and what are the things, like looking at materially, social, and economic wise, like how are they getting protected. So that casting wide net actually was helpful for you to see that there are many entry points that one could get in, and we came up with pretty solid, I think, from different areas to each one. So getting back into the relationships that you have built, maybe you can give some insights. We have some first year students of design and urban ecologies. They're the next in the thesis for next year. How did you build up these relationships and coming in? And the second part of the question is, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the future. So we think of the design urban ecologies pieces as a beginning of a practice that you are hoping to continue in some form. What does those relationships mean for both of you? It's a question.
I think for me, I'm pretty like relentless when I want to like have a community partner. So if like one person doesn't reply, I'm like on to the next, being like, hi, just following up. And I'm really grateful for like just the space of like sustainability and environmental justice. Like people are open to having those conversations. So it's been like really, I don't know, encouraging and affirming that there is like a need that like needs to be filled. And so even when it comes to the library, like I said, it was just like a cold email that I just thought I was gonna reserve a room and see if people walk in, and it just turned into like, a 2-year relationship with the library. And I'm still also hosting workshops with them in collaboration with their like youth.
Yeah. I think one strong point that I want to emphasize the work that you did, Ruth, is that you didn't really wait for the idea to develop fully, but you started practicing, and that as a design practice, really learning from that doing and working on has been a really strong point that we iterated as we move forward.
Yeah, and I think another, just add on to the compliments, but another thing that you kept doing was showing up consistently. It wasn't that, the one time that you went to the library that an opportunity occurred. It's that you were there consistently, which meant that community members sort of trusted you and knew that you were going to continue to come back, which I think is one thing that like helped develop the foundation for our relationships in the project. I think that, both of us have been spending a lot of time within the e-waste and repair community. And so as a result, it means that people kind of know that we are trustable, that we're doing work already. But then there's also this matter of serendipity, as you mentioned, like chance, like you might meet someone at an e-waste event or get introduced to another person. I think that's also a lot of the way that, Slow Circuits has developed. meeting Kendall one day at a e-waste event to emailing Ashonda for a partnership and her having just written a post-it note, which is like e-waste solution. Things kind of have had this kind of mystical effect. And I don't know that that's always like a research methodology, but I think it's just about kind of your heart being in the right place and you showing up. And yeah, make the continue to work.
Can you tell a little bit about the next steps for after? You mentioned that you are gonna have some more workshops and the
Use the community, I'm looking here to show you.
Yeah, I think the next steps are continuing to work on the library itself. I think, we're still learning from the first few weeks of it launching. So I think iterating it and making sure that like we're not like setting up the library in a way that it can't stay in existence. And then I think also like continuing to expand within the kind of digital repair and also like surveillance space. There's some really interesting people that are doing work that we're starting to partner with. And I think what's cool is that we're taking these two different things that people don't often associate and bringing them together. And there is kind of an appetite for that. So I think, yeah, the workshops, library.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was gonna say also the entry points that I was saying. We should all apply to the after school program. Like there's like about what, $775 million in after school programming in New York City. And you have to like apply in August and it's a 6-year contract. And there's nothing that exists within like environmental education or circularity. Whereas like in Finland, for example, they have like made it like a mandatory programming that they have, like these type of programmings exist in other countries. It's like, and there are so many different departments, but yeah, again, there's no existing intersection, so it's like expanding on the
perfect. I don't know if you have time to get a few more minutes. Yeah. Any questions or any comments?
Yes, I was just gonna say that the two of you have so much synergies with the community, that it seems like you should do this up.
We've been dreaming of
Definitely,
that. It's
yeah.
just, there's only so much time in the summer.
Right, but as you go out for the after school grant,
Yeah.
there's.
Yes, so
Yeah.
actually, yes, Ruth just put in the perfect moment. The synergy in the whole cohort is, I think there are a lot of threads as we move through. I think this is the moment to wrap this one up. Thank you so much to both of you. Okay, we have like 5 minutes like stretching, fetching some drinks or food. We have some food in the back. Immediately.
हाँ जी ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲਿੰਕ ਤੇ ਲੌਗਇਨ ਕਰ ਲਓ 5 ਮਿੰਟ ਬਾਅਦ ਸਟਾਰਟ ਹੋ ਜਾਏਗਾ
So, today, it's on memory and solidarity, and the Tandoori Walu's parents were joining from Pakistan. So I will be the first student, and then we'll be at the lunch. 15 minutes each.
Okay, so before we talk about anything, I want us to stay with what we just heard for a moment. Notice how the body responds to rhythm before the mind is trying to explain it. So how rhythm brings a feeling of joy and presence within our bodies. So this rhythm that you heard is coming from the heating drum circle in Marcus Garden Park in London. And this is a drumming tradition that has been in that area for more than 60 years. For the people who gather there, this sound is inheritance and community. But in a changing Harlem, sounds like these are increasingly under pressure. They can be heard as disturbances rather than drumming. So my thesis basically begins from this tension. What happens when a sound that carries memory, care, and collective presence becomes something that must be justified and silenced? So my name is Arun Fatma, and my thesis is titled "The Soundscapes of Resistance, Power, Belonging, and Gentrification in Harmony." So we often understand gentrification through what we can see: new buildings, rising rents, changing storefronts, and new residents, etc. But my thesis basically looks at something less visible but deeply felt, that is the transformation of Harlem's sonic public realm. So at the heart of this work is the idea that sound is political. It is not only about volume or decibel, but also about who is allowed to be heard and whose sound is treated as out of place. Through the Marcus Garvey Parking Drum Circle, I examine how long-standing Black sonic practices are reclassified as noise through changing neighborhood expectations, development pressures, public space governance, and systems like 311 noise campaigns. So before I entered this project as a researcher, I entered it as a listener. So I come from Pakistan, where public sound is part of daily life. In a bazaar, you hear vendors, bargaining, shop music, traffic, and constant negotiation of space. It can be loud and chaotic, but it is also social. It tells you that life is happening. So I want to play a very short clip from a bazaar in Pakistan, not to compare it directly to Harlem, but to show the sound culture I come from. And it shaped how I listen and made me aware that sound can be livelihood, can be care, can be public presence. Might have to. Yeah. And vendors selling their products. When these people asking for money by saying, yeah, children, they is a
ecosystem created for the sounds that happen in that area. And this is, again, it's very, sounds, but are much more vibrant, but I have. So. we- So when I came to New York, I became more aware of how differently public sound is understood and regulated here. So some sounds are welcomed as culture, while others are quickly marked as noise or disorder. I am also aware that I am not from Harlem and I am not speaking for the drum circle. I approach this work as an outside researcher, but as someone who understands that public sound can carry deep social meaning. So for this thesis, theory helped me move from asking what sounds are present to asking how sound is organized by power. Understanding soundscapes as environment and perception helped me understand Harlem as an acoustic environment shaped by learning and expectations of public order. Acoustic territoriality helped me examine how sound claims space and how surveillance, redevelopment, and complaint systems redraw who may be audible. Auditory equity allowed me to frame public space justice as the right for community sounds to be heard without being misled as disorder. And finally, the contested sonic commons frames Marcus Garvey Park as a shared soundscape where collective memory is carried through rhythm, but increasingly negotiated through governance, comfort, and complaint. So building from this framework, my methodology was designed to move between systems and lived experience. I combined 311 voice complaint mapping, policy and governance analysis, site observations, a sound perception survey, and ethnography with oral histories. So this allowed me to trace sound from cityscape to Marcus Garvey Park, and finally to the voices and encounters through which sound becomes belonging. So these methods are detailed out as we'll go further into the presentation. So my spatial analysis became very important because it provided evidence for many of the major claims I made in this thesis. I worked with 10 years of NYC 311 voice complaint data and mapped complaint density across the city using QGIS. I basically then layered this with demographic and urban change indicators, including income, rent, race, renter share, and new building permit data. So all these four variables were combined to build a citywide gentrification index that helped me read gentrification sonically through uneven exposure, especially for communities more vulnerable to displacement and complaint-based conflict. So the final gentrification index was then overlaid with aggregated NYC 311 voice complaint across a 10 years period, broken into 5 years intervals. And this revealed a sharp increase in noise complaints in the most recent 5 years, showing how complaint activity basically intensifies alongside broader patterns of neighborhood change. So this brings the analysis back to the community at the center of this project, the Marcus Garvey Park Healing Drum Circle. It is a long-running Black and Afro-Caribbean sonic tradition that has held space in Harlem for more than 60 years through neighborhood change and pressure over where it is allowed to gather. So Donald, one of the drummers and a long-time Harlem resident, described it beautifully when he said, "The sound that we generate is resistance, but it is also reassurance." And for me, that basically captures the heart of the project. The circle basically resists erasure while keeping Harlem's cultural memory alive in public space. At this point, I also wanted to acknowledge Donald and Lynn Lewis, a longtime Harlem resident and community organizer, whose reflections basically helped me understand the drum circle with a much longer history. Like it's basically they helped me to understand the history more properly, and I got to know the insights about the area, and they are the kindest and the sweetest persons I know. And all of my research, I basically owe them. Thank you so much for that. So moving forward, I created this historical timeline to basically trace how sound, space, and governance have evolved together in Harlem from the park's establishment in the 19th century to its present day role as a contested heritage landscape. So the timeline is basically organized across three interconnected scales: Harlem, Pakistani Park, and the broader city scale of policy, law, and sonic governance. So across each scale, the timeline basically highlights key events and shifts that became important in shaping the final design propositions. For example, it highlights the park's long historical cultural events like Summer of Soul, Charlie Parker Jazz Festival, which basically helped me situate the Healing Drum Circle within a broader tradition of public sonic life. How certain historical and sonically rich institutions have been shut down due to gentrification pressures. And lastly, how laws and policies formalized what counts as acceptable sound, connecting to the regulatory pressures shaping this project today. So from the research, I brought the main findings together into this synthesis matrix. So each column basically represents a key theme that kept appearing across the data, fieldwork, interviews, the policy analysis. So this helped me move from research findings into design direction, identifying the insights that would basically shape the final proposition for my thesis. So, for example, how most of the New Yorkers are basically unaware of their cultural sound rights that they have in public space. How so many cultural sound practices existed in the city but vanished due to gentrification pressures. How certain policies and laws, for example, the Cabaret law criminalized Black cultural sounds. And most importantly, how some loud sounds like construction, siren, honking, etc. are tolerated in the name of development and urban life, while community sounds like the drumming circle and street musicians are more easily questioned. So this graph is from one of my survey responses that I conducted in the city, which provides evidence for the claim through numbers. I also did a detailed spatial and governance analysis of Pakistani Park to understand how the park's design and administration can play a role in silencing certain sounds while promoting others. So this helped me see the park as a governed soundscape where circulations, rules, programmings, and complaints all shape who gets to be heard. So all of this research basically came together into these vectors of change organized across four main domains: memory preservation, public pedagogy, policy reform, spatial design. So each domain basically opens up a different kind of intervention, and placing them across the scale of New York City, Harlem, and Marcus Garvey Park basically helped me clarify where each idea could have the most meaningful impact. One of these, out of all these different vectors, the sonic documentary became the most meaningful direction for me to develop further. The documentary basically aligned the most with the core question of my thesis. If the project is about sound, listening, and public presence, then the final form also had to work through sound. So a written thesis can basically explain the issue, but an audio documentary can make people actually hear what is at stake. So the documentary brings together the main materials of my research: oral histories, field recordings, site observations, policy analysis, and the atmosphere of Marcus Garvey Park itself. It is a way of translating research into a public listening experience, and the goal is to move the word beyond academic analysis and create something that can circulate for wider publics who may not otherwise understand why this sound matters. So the logic of the audio documentary is that it brings together forms of evidence that usually remain separate. The map shows spatial patterns, the policy analysis shows systems, the oral histories carry memory and lived experience. But these materials in an audio documentary can be heard in relation to one another, and I think that is one of the very important elements. So if I am arguing that listening is political, then the audience also has to be fully placed within a position of listening. So the documentary also makes governance audible. The 311 complaint, a park rule, a planning category can seem abstract on paper, but when placed next to the drumming, testimony, and ambient park life, it becomes clear how policy enters everyday experience. So the documentary works in three ways: as an archive of memory, as an analytical form that connects sound to power, and a public tool that can make the research accessible beyond an academic audience. So here is a tentative breakdown that I intend to have for my documentary, highlighting the areas that I want to cover within my work. The documentary is going to be approximately 30 minutes long, and it's going to cover 5 segments ranging from history, collective memory, spatial design, and their impacts on sound, complaint regimes, and finally the future of the sonic performance. So the work basically moves through 5 stages that are marked here. Each stage has a specific role. Training sets the narrative and ethics, recording gathers oral histories, ambient sounds, and sound walks. Structurally, basically turns the material into chapters, while editing brings together field recordings, analysis, and montage. So, revision includes listening, participant review, and public circulation. So the key point is that the process is not linear or extractive in any way. It includes feedbacks and re-engagement. So the documentary develops through listening with people, guided by ethical listening and accountability. I have also developed storyboards as scripts for my chapters, and so far I have fully completed the prologue and chapter 1 of the documentary, which have basically established the tone and structure and the listening approach for the full piece. So the remaining chapters are now in the editing process with the core material already selected. So I plan to have this documentary completed by the end of this summer. So this semester I also took a sound design course, which has directly supported the production process by helping me work more carefully with editing, layering, and sonic atmosphere. Talking about the impact, this work operates at 3 linked scales. At the personal scale, collaborators basically gain an organized recording and a usable narrative. At the part scale, the documentary and the archive basically gives MSc parts clear evidence of why these sounds matter. And at the Harlem and citywide scale, the project offers a model for treating sound as something to plan for. So the project is also making contributions to sound studies, urban studies, design and planning by framing sound as a part of urban justice. So it basically develops auditory equity as a planning concern, combines listening-based research with data and policy analysis, and basically documents that drum circle as collective memory. So speaking of this and returning to my vectors of transformation and talking about the future, I also have been developing a policy proposal as a minor component of my thesis, which I'll definitely not go deeper into because it's still in the phase of developing, but it's basically a recurring community sound governance framework for New York City parks. And it looks into 3 major parts of the implementation. So firstly, it talks about creating a semi-common zone as a clearly marked shared use area with posted hours, boundaries, and protected circulation for all the New York City parks that are present. Secondly, it talks about a mediation first 311 pathway. So whenever there is a noise complaint made, that call directly goes to the police and there's a dispatch of FIPD, which again is something that is a safety threat, and it basically results into more number of arrests than needed. And thirdly, it talks about a co-produced stewardship agreement between the residents that have been in that area, newer residents, and the people who are playing drum or any kind of instrument in that space. So in that way, maybe they could get a mediation from that. Yeah, so I think this is the end, and I went a little overboard. This is the QR code for my prologue if you guys want to listen to it. And thank you so much for listening.
Wow. So this is the last call. Thank you. Right, I'm gonna be doing a little DJing here. Oh. All right, let's begin. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Delaney Connor.
and today I will be presenting my master's thesis entitled Organizing Block Power, Bed-Stuy Block Associations, and Participatory Governance in New York City. Before I begin, yet miss an opportunity to thank some people in the room for without whom this project would not exist. Thank you to my family, friends, roommates, for distracting me from the stress of this work and reminding me what's important in life. To the Bed-Stuy community and its leaders, some of whom are in the room, thank you for welcoming me into your family and teaching me about what the Bed-Stuy say hi mentality really means. And to the GUE faculty, professors, girls, thanks for making our space of learning and personal growth into one also infused with joy and the practices we hope to bring into the world through our work. So I choose this quote because it's about the interconnectedness of relationships between humans and with humans in the natural world. It's also a quote by the namesake of and original steward of the land which I call home, Seattle, Washington. My research investigates the interconnectedness of neighbors, specifically those who share a block, and how they connect with one another. So my thesis is about block associations in Bedford-Stuyvesant. It investigates their historical legacy, how they operate in the present, and how and why they should be strengthened. So what is a block association? They're a group of neighbors who convene and organize around issues affecting their block. They're similar to a homeowners or tenants association, but different because in a place like New York City, blocks include a variety of building typologies, built with renters, owners, and sometimes even businesses. Block associations can be formal or informal. Some focus all efforts on an annual block party, others focus on beautification and keeping the block clean. Some also take on more ambitious projects, convene regularly, are registered nonprofits, and have formal bylaws and internal governance structures. And I focus on Bed-Stuy, a neighborhood in central Brooklyn known for its tree-lined brownstone streets, food culture, epic summer block parties, and Black cultural history and homeownership. Contemporary Bed-Stuy is a place, however, that has undergone immense change under the gentrification process in the last 20 years. The essence of this change is articulated here by a longtime resident of Bed-Stuy. New residents feel as though they discovered an uncharted land. There are people who existed there long before their arrival, and they can definitely add flavor to your life. But you know, you have to speak. There are people on my block that have lived here for a number of years that will look to the ground when I walk by, or look straight past when I'm standing in the yard. And you know, it's their right, but it's also their loss. And if people can't even be as polite as to greet each other when they pass in the street, it starts a very toxic way of interacting with the world. Everybody speaks to everybody. Saying hello, it costs you nothing, it's literally meaningless. And I bring this quote in because it speaks to both how and why I approached this research. As a newcomer to the neighborhood, I immediately picked up on the tension and disconnect between long-term and new-seeming residents. This research emerges from my own experience as someone taking part in this demographic change and trying to find ways to meaningfully engage with my neighbors. Block associations are often dismissed as acting in the interests of homeowners and of collaboration with local police to fight crime on the block. While my research confirms that these have historically been the case, I became interested in how these associations help manage the stress of change in the neighborhood and of their possibility to organize neighbors, not just socially, but also politically. I also wondered if my block had an association, and discovered that they're quite elusive and not formally listed anywhere. So I began to strategize how to locate them and discovered the data set for the block party permits also names the block associations who filed them. So I mapped these associations dating back to 2008, and it just so happened that the majority of block associations were concentrated in my neighborhood, Bed-Stuy, which you can see in that little pink box there. Zooming in, we can see that over 50% of blocks in Bed-Stuy have active associations. And I presented an interactive web-based version of this map at the 2026 NYC Open Data Conference. And I used this research project to learn everything I could about block associations in my neighborhood and to explore my questions about them and their potential to connect neighbors across difference and build community power, I made sure to approach this research according to the same relationality this thesis argues there ought to be more of. After rigorous training in the DOE Critical Theory Bootcamp, I gravitated towards these frameworks, how to help me make sense of the origins of inequality in this country, how that inequality manifests in the built environment, what characterizes and flows through the social networks that bind people together, and how these bonds can become ones defined by action taken towards mutual liberation. So to ground these questions, I used a variety of methods. I attended countless community meetings where I met amazing people, had conversations, and learned about their experience with the block in the neighborhood and its history. I conducted some long-form interviews with some of these people who I met, as well as some community organizing work in Bed-Stuy and Central Brooklyn. I dove deep into archival research, mainly through newspaper and oral history formats because of the lack of historicization of block associations in Bed-Stuy. I also had a foray as a political candidate, and so I canvassed for blocks to run for the county committee, and I also issued a survey which got 100 results. I also did some spatial mapping. And so I'll now make sense of some of the insights that I've gathered through these methods, building to how this question about politicizing the block can be answered, and how block associations can make this happen. By politicizing, I don't mean in the capital P sense, as in the electoral political process. By politicizing, I mean in the solidarity sense, small acts of people's consideration for their neighbors, of taking action towards solving problems on the block nonviolently. But politicizing the block is a process that begins with saying hello, of mutual recognition. The architecture of the street is really what shapes mutual recognition on the block. Features like stoops, benches, community gardens, and other social infrastructure help propagate an awareness of the other through encounters. Oh no, it's wrong. A space of appearance, if you will. And many elder residents are the instigators of this recognition, spending time outside the Sweden Wall. On the left, you'll see a picture of my neighbors, Joyce and Carolyn, who sit out on the front in front of their home every day when the weather is above 60 degrees and greet all who pass by. And Google Street View confirms the this. The one's familiarity with the other is established, a sense of community begins to develop. Connections and relationships are catalyzed and characterized by social opportunities that block associations orchestrate, such as block parties in the summer, holiday parties in the winter. A favorite project was one taken on by the 500 Monroe Street Block Association, photos in the room who helped this on, and a group of residents were struck by the importance of preserving the legacy of the elders on their block and created a documentary about them. And they also honored the old-time residents at a screening with a Q&A panel. These sorts of gatherings in community history are an excellent way to bring in newcomers and to sustain relationships with block residents. Block associations can also create a connection to neighbors, but also provide opportunities for cooperation on shared projects. This means planning the block party, hosting stoop sales to help fundraise for it, shared maintenance of physical objects through block cleanups, tree, flower beds, and community gardens. I saw this a few weeks ago at the 16th annual Flower Bed-Stuy, which Nicole helped put on way back when. And this event is hosted by the Bridge Street Development Corporation in Bed-Stuy, as well as the Bed-Stuy Works Alliance, Bed-Stuy's Association of Associations. And there were over 60 Bed-Stuy block associations who came together to pick up flowers to be taken back and planted on their blocks. While beautification is tied to making property values increase for the homeowner, it also sets aside time for neighbors to get to know one another, to find a common interest in taking care of their shared space. And it's through opportunities for connection and cooperation that trust is built. Trust is a process of relying on others, reciprocated. It can also look like looking after a neighbor's dog, picking up groceries for an elder resident. Trust also surfaces and becomes essential during times of crisis. For those who are unaware, Bed-Stuy and other parts of New York City are currently undergoing a deep theft crisis where the homes of largely older Black residents are being stolen through fraudulent and manipulative tactics. Block associations are forming rapid response networks to help neighbors facing eviction through deep theft. This map shows the 1938 Homeowners Loan Association map, formerly known as the redlining map, where each neighborhood was graded according to the perceived lending risk. Green was safest, red was riskiest. These grades were assigned largely on the basis of racial composition, and Bed-Stuy was graded red. From the 1940s onward, Bed-Stuy was disinvested in by banks, by the city, and by the federal government. Many block associations took root during this period to help neighbors take collective action where the market and the state have withdrawn. What institutions refused to provide, these neighbors entrusted each other to build themselves. And you'll see here that 80% of active block associations are neighborhoods formerly districted as grade C or grade D. So finally, experimentation and action form the kind of solidarity considered political. Not every block association reaches this register. Some reach it in a parochial way, organizing to defend property values against renters or to exclude unwanted neighbors. True political action, though, is not at the cost of others' well-being. It's an action in the interest of self and other, and finding where the two are intertwined. The block associations who do reach this register, they become human scale spaces to practice new ideas. One resident I spoke with wanted to start a SUSU on his block, and a SUSU is a Caribbean rotating savings and credit association where neighbors contribute to a shared pot and take turns receiving the full amount. Another survey respondent of mine wanted to start a tool share on their block. These are small experiments, but political ones. They reorganize how neighbors relate to money, property, and each other. And they're possible. They're not made possible without conditions of support. So this experimentation and action can also be nurtured by external groups. Part of this research has included my organizing with a group called the Crown Heights Care Collective on a project called Block Power, which is an initiative to support and politicize block associations across central Brooklyn. They host Block Power summits every other month where block leaders meet each other to share ideas together. And they also help block associations directly with meeting facilitation, canvassing, and block party tabling. They are also developing a radical map of block associations through a map called Block Mapper, which is on the left. So what follows are a pathway to strengthen and network block associations based on my research and findings applied to a speculative design of New York City's governance to become more participatory. Governing and strengthening block associations is a worthwhile endeavor, and now is an opportune time to do so because New York City's new mayoral administration and its newly established Office of Mass Engagement. Their vision is one that's committed to reaching New Yorkers where they are, organizing them, and building long-term organizing throughout our city. We are building the power of everyday New Yorkers, and we are building a city that works for all of us, they say. Strengthening block associations, I believe, fits perfectly in this vision. Not only will a network of block associations help strengthen the framed relationships between neighbors amidst turnover and change, they also create opportunities for people to connect to government and government to connect back to people. So some ways I've identified to strengthen block associations fall into these categories. First, administrative support. Many block association leaders report struggling to use technology, ways to organize their neighbors. There's also a big gap for training, supporting and strengthening block associations. Secondly, networking them. Many presidents I interviewed expressed a desire to connect with one another, but lacking opportunity to do so. This is a latent desire for confederation, learning from each other's successes and challenges can strengthen this organizing work. Third, mapping and discoverability. As I highlighted, there's no formal register. Newcomers to the resident neighborhood like myself may struggle to access their block association. And finally, funding. Money makes the world go round. Block associations need money for operational work, block parties, and planters. And while the city's Love Your Block program and other micro grants offer funding, they're competitive, hard to find, and require a level of organization block associations don't yet have. And also assemblies. In my research, perhaps the most exciting thing I found was about this 1976 forum amidst the New York City fiscal crisis, which brought together 2,500 block leaders around the city. They came together at Hunter College and had workshops on topics ranging from sanitation and crime to fundraising, daycare, and even fighting City Hall. So through assemblies like this at the neighborhood, borough, and citywide scale, I think associations could help to shape pathways into New York City governance. Because 40% of New Yorkers can't participate in the formal voting process as non-citizens, and community boards, while they're numerous, represent between 40 and 200,000 people and also retain only an advisory position within city governance. So this paper concludes with the inclusion of block associations within community boards and creating pathways to participatory governance. NBA block associations might be able to influence things on their block, such as pushing back on the speculative real estate market's governance over neighborhood change, participating in pending legislation like COPA, Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, and TOPA, Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, could give groups a right to refusal when buildings come up for sale on their block. This is how neighborhood change should be shaped by residents, not change undue to them. And while this program may not have taught me much about urban planning, it has taught me lots about how and why cities should be designed. A process of planning that empowers residents to build power in cities in their own visions of the world. And because I have not mentioned our Lord and Savior yet, I will quote David Harvey, who's actually quoting Henri Lefebvre. The right to the city is far more than a right of individual access to the resources the city embodies. It's a right to change ourselves by changing the city. So this thesis is really about reimagining the urban planning process so that residents can do exactly that, change themselves by changing the city. And I'm gonna skip over these. I don't have time. And thank you. The paper I wrote I was near community that I published, but also do Seattle's not how I wish neighbors places that they're more.
Thank you so much, and congratulations. I really admire the persistence being there. This was very cool with your project. You embedded yourself into neighborhoods that you had very rich experiences with, but also enriching for others. From what you showed. And you focus a lot, your work focusing on what we call social reproduction, this solidarity, and all these practices that keep communities together. And very often we consider this as invisible labor. It's not very obvious to the others or outside what are the processes of the invisible process that do this work. But there is also a lot of invisible labor in your own work. And for example, I know that just said one line, and I also did a sound class this semester, which is developed by Forsha. Well, this one class occupies like 50% of your time. You work there day and night. So, and we didn't hear even the podcast you produced, the first segment that took such a long time. So this is an example of this invisible labor. And for you, the canvassing, you went out there, you participated in all this kind of flowering, planting, and we did a lot of hands-on things. How did this change you, and how can you reflect on these parts that might not be visible in the theoretical thing?
First of all, it's an advice to not to learn a new software in your I spend my days and nights in this building, and this building literally haunts me now. So, I never intended to make a documentary. When I started this project, I just wanted this project to lead me to the final conclusion. And eventually, when I realized that documentary would be the best fit for that, I knew I had to learn the softwares, I had to learn the basics, I had to learn how to basically reproduce the ambiances that I wanted to talk about. So I think the main drive came from the project itself. It came from the people who were associated with me within this project, because they gave me so much. They not just in terms of knowledge, but in terms of love and support and the idea and just the eagerness within them to put their points forward that otherwise it's not being done. So I think that was the main drive, and eventually not having your parents here is another thing that you have lots of time in your hands, and again my partner is very shy about it, but he has been very supportive
That's a musical.
Yeah.
To that question about municipal labor, I guess I would say, I mean, my project was so much like a self-discovery, discovery experience. And it's so hard to, and even trying to like draw insights, it's so hard to get in mind what is just me becoming an active citizen in my neighborhood and researching it. And so I think, you know, the collaborators, the people who I bounced ideas off of and who I learned from, you know, they feel like friends as much as they feel like people who I researched. And I think that's such an important, you know, making research a lifestyle, making it really just something that you're excited to do, excited to write about and all the things. And those relationships are the things that will endure past the paper submission more than anything else. And I look forward to exploring what that means.
I think they said the things about the future direction, that the demand to have it.
Yeah, I did skip over that. I mean, through my work, I've just continued to meet people who are already thinking about something, or have been kind of waiting to find people to connect with, or to already siloed in their work, and I didn't have the time for this research project to create some sort of community-facing proposal / report yet, but I would love to host some sort of presentation / community conversation around this topic. I have a lot of excitement and ideas, but I'm not the sort of person who's lived their whole life in this neighborhood, and so I find it very awkward to suggest change it's not possible without other folks in dialogue. So yeah, I think next steps for me are that, and also there's so much like archival work that I kind of set aside that I didn't have time to because of the constraints of time. So I'd love to go up. The Citizens Committee organized a lot of block associations strengthening in the 70s, has this archive up in the Upper West Side, and they have all this ephemera from the ways that they organized block associations in the 70s, so I'd love to spend some time there too.
There's maybe like some questions and we're going to potentially, you know, your names, maybe the community members, like, yeah, and to know the process as well, closely. Okay, that's good.
I have a question about the podcast. When is is that including the summer? So is there gonna be a release party?
Yes, for the fun part and not the actual word, right? So the documentary is going to be completed by the end of this summer. I hope to hold a screening in August, but let's see, it's underway again, learning a new software, it's taking some time because it's coming. August is something that I anticipate for this documentary.
What's your question?
Hi, I'm Nicole Briggs. I'm working with Delaney. I'm one of the community, excuse me, I have a slight cold, excuse me. I'm one of the community organizers in Memphis, Stuyvesant, and I've done a lot of work with block associations. And I remember when Delaney first came to me with the idea of this project, I was like, I love this. And I'm so proud of you and what you've been able to accomplish. She has really embedded herself in the community. She's done a lot of work with block associations. She's talked to all the key players. Because a few people have come back to me like, do you Delaney? And so that let me know that she was really on the path and she was really excited about the work. And I always say that block associations are an untapped resource in our communities. They're very much like a central Brooklyn thing, but they can work in almost any neighborhood or any community. They're hyper localized. And it really is a great way to meet your neighbors and address issues before they become bigger. I mean, I'm the vice president of my block association and I love it. I'll get a phone call, Nicole, you got to move your car. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I run downstairs to move my car and I do the same thing for my neighbors as well. Like an Amazon package got delivered, it was the wrong building, but because of the block association, I recognized the name. And I can send her a text message like, hey, I have your summer furniture in the lobby. So, you know, block associations are a great resource. I'm so happy you did this research to kind of bring it up to a higher level so that now more people can know and this information can kind of turnkey
throughout the city, so people know like it's within their own units. But maybe at the end, maybe, yeah.
We'll another short break and then we have the last two presentations on here. Like. So in our last third and last panel, we have Wolfgang and Shivani David, and hold on to your questions. We're gonna have a conversation with Professor Mjolnir Mitrosevich right after that, and you can pose your question. It will be tough. It will be tough.
Oh, no.
Quality and this is indeterminate edges, and subtitle, they are just generated all around the everyday. Basically, so there is, I'm playing jazz music right now, which I want to play. So we're gonna have two people, whoever you're sitting, standing, whatever. So I'm gonna have this side be group B, and that side A. So what they would do, you do one snap, with like one snap, three snap, one snap, three snap. And I need you to say it with me. Say with one snap, three snap, one snap, three snap, one snap, three snap. Keep going, and I'm gonna do this one. Well, I'm sorry, my apologies. So it was a little hard to demonstrate all of the things we're gonna do. But anyway, so what we just did, we had this part of the audience did the street rhythms review, did like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we had this part did the syncopations. So we did a do. So these together, this pairing together, the street beats create an anchor, it repeats and provides predictability, and the looser syncopated beats provide invites participation through that loose and openness of rhythms. So this thesis began with my very embodied and also at the time very intuitive understanding of groove in social dances, and this is some of the interviews I found with musicians and dancers and asked what groove means to them. So by asking 20,000 musicians and dancers, what's surprising, what is especially surprising to me is how spatial it is felt in people's bodies. The connectivity, it's a place in between, it's an invisible space for socialization, it's internal, it's honesty. So a lot of the very beautiful things happening in the process. And especially within this kind of like social dance and music traditions in the African diasporic communities. So to take a deeper look on what groove is and what it means, there's a book by Wilford on groove phenomenology of rhythm and nuance. It says, so indeterminacy is what Carl found Merleau-Ponty in describing as that phenomenology. In a closer reading of Merleau-Ponty in phenomenology of perception, it describes the body as held in a permanent oscillation between an attraction to the richness of the world and an anxious running against the getting lost or absorbed in the same richness. It lives in this unity, so what the body needs to live is not pure closure, nor pure openness, but a structure that holds the two in productive relations. Enough anchor that body is not lost, also enough openly that, provides play and experimentation process. So this thesis proposes that indeterminate edges are an empirical pattern and also something we should pay close attention to because it matters closely to our relationship with the immediate public space one have access to in the city. So here are some pictures of people gravitating towards edges in urban open spaces. And then this is the thesis statement. So my positionality, as you already know, I'm a social dancer. I do vernacular jazz dance and hip hop. And I'm also a transplant in many different cities. I've lived in 5 cities after I turned 18. And all of the experience, these two together, shaped the growth of this thesis because they've trained me to look at spaces from a very observant eye. The social dancing has taught me to see the social making of the spatial production, a process, a negotiation between bodies and space, and the living across cities has taught me that people actually do learn from like the city, how a city uses public spaces, because in all of the 5 different cities, how they use them are very different. So this is one of the chapters in my thesis. I call it Temporal Liminal Hopeful, and it's a very theoretical chapter breaking down why specific temporal liminal hopeful eye to read public space is important in this thesis. So first, the attitude is we need to see space as the product of temporal practice. And so that, what that looks like in reality is, this is an example of a Domino's corner at Crowne Plaza, Queens. And by returning to this corner of the plaza, by seeing a group of people every day in the afternoon, they create a time space that is theirs. And in urban public spaces like New York City, a lot of the public spaces has retreated back into private domains. So this thesis argues that the remake and the creation of time spaces in the existing public realm is especially important under today's new report. So this is the second part, the liminal part. So liminality is this in-between state that kind of transitions from a state to a second state. So it's supposed to be like a generative, it's supposed to be full of changes. But today when you search liminal space on the internet, it's interesting that it shows spaces of like haunted hallways and in the thesis I argue that it's not because people are necessarily afraid of changes, because it's the fear that the threshold has lost its exit. People are fearing that it's going to be trapped in this liminal space. So what does that have to do with public spaces? So in through optimism, Laurent Ballot has named this phenomenon called impasse, and it's basically a stretch of time on the threshold that is extended. So in that impasse, we're not moving forward, and also we're trapped in this cruel optimism by like repeated rhythmic patterns we do every day, and there's like no credit future that is promising to us, or like if there is one, we're still like trapped in this cruel optimism without ever getting there. And so that's in Ballot's saying that's what it looks like in the neoliberal present. It's cities full of private destinations and the very traffic driven, efficiency driven logic that has made the public space. This is what she says, a moment without edges. So we're just like all in this in the vast void public space together, but we all need like a destination yet to go to a public space, not just like being in the public. So anyway, so what is insightful here is, so if what we said earlier about liminal spaces and everything, has is what's teaching us that maybe an exit isn't the only necessary thing for this condition. So for somebody who is dog paddling in a pool, of course, an exit could be getting out of the pool, but also another resolution could be having a pole within the pool. So they have something to reach on, to push off from. And so the relationship with the water changes. So they're not no longer like anxious staying in the water, looking for a place to land. They're enjoying and being in the water. So anyway, all that is to say, we're naming the edge condition in urban public spaces as what this theory looks like in urban spaces. And all of the 4 generations of urbanists to do this as this framing to describe edge as an effect, and people gravitate towards them, and only if the edge works, the public space would work. And from all of them, this thesis is asking, now the rebuilding of public space, it asks for public space to be seen again through its temporal creations of the time space and through its appropriations around the edge spaces. So I also, so that's their observation. I also did my own observations. I visited 10 different pedestrian plazas in New York City, and they are the DOT pedestrian plazas. So they're formerly owned by New York Streets. So they're formerly New York Street. Sorry. They're formerly street roads, but underused. So they transformed them into public spaces. And this is the overview of the program. This is the type of plaza partners they have. And what's very interesting is in some of the plazas, for example, this one features a more porous, the multiple layers nested together, kind of like features the porosity that's within the public space. And this one has a big open space and with only like bench edges along the space, is creating this vast void in the middle for this particular plaza. And some comparisons and what people brought to these 2 plazas are very different. The first ones, people brought their own chairs, their own speakers to play music, their own drinks, and everybody knows each other in the plaza. And people hang out and say, like, go say hi to each other from table to table. But the other one, people were just like silo, sitting down and looking at their phones. So these are the porosity of edges we mentioned before. So as you can see, one features like multiple layers and more porous and openness. The other is kind of just like a border. And is that a coincidence? In more plazas, it shows the same thing. So this is also one of the other more social plazas observed in this field visits. This is regardless by Chambers Street. So taken together from the site visits, we have observed different edges for different behaviors in public spaces. And there are primary edges, secondary edges, and tertiary edges. And the primary edge are the ones that takes movements and kind of like boards the place. And secondary edges are kind of more interactive, and when you can play with appropriate is within the appropriate height. And tertiary edges are spaces claimed when activity emerges as something that's singular, you brought into a space. So these are some of the TST pairings of each plaza. So that yields the question, so are secondary edges better? Not necessarily, because this one has all movable chairs and tables, as William White suggested, there are people love movable cities. But this one is interesting because they're not being used. And it's particularly because it's sitting on a very, very busy part of the street. It's a median, so this part of the plaza is flowing in the middle of like many different directions of the sidewalks. And it serves a very high pedestrian traffic, 944 per 30 minutes. So that's one example. And this is another example of Roberto Clemente in Bronx. It's very interesting because this plaza is one of the only plaza that features a very long ribbon-like continuous secondary edge, and without even any hostile architectural spikes on it. But during the site visit, there is fences fenced along basically the entire area of the plaza. And I was very curious to ask the local residents what happened. So they said 6 months ago, the police fenced this area because there was a lot of drug addicts in the area. And I was asking them how they feel about this. And to my surprises, 5 of the 5 people I surveyed, they were very happy about this decision into this local public space because this one also, if compared to the kind of like this one is sitting on the intersection between 8 different directions and 5 different streets. So it's so the question of like the edge condition and of like the plaza as an edge also within the broader urban neighborhood is also something worth asking, not only the edge conditions within the plaza by itself. So what do I mean by that, plaza as an edge? Because they're all formal street roads, they kind of share a similar lexicon. These are some of the types. And also plaza as an edge, 76% of the plaza in this program sit at the intersection between different zoning categories: residential, commercial, park, manufacturing. And that's a big statistical anchor for this. And also this one, plaza as edge for inequality, this is also 72% of the plaza in this program sits in places of significant income inequality. So all that is to say, edges can exist within a public space for the materiality and the furnishing of the public space, and also what that furnishing does with the people that inhabits them, what kind of spatial affordance creates what kind of behavior, and what makes you want to sit on an edge or a ledge, as William White calls it. So that's one of the questions to ask. Another question to ask is, how is the plaza as a condition in urban design for mediating different publics and different spatial fabrics within the urban neighborhoods? So anyway, all that is to say, every plaza is unique and situated. All that is to say, so what it brings back to group is kind of like framing edge. You can kind of think about it as like a strong beat, a straight rhythm that dictates the movement that's non-negotiable. And more porous open edges are the syncopation, the movability, the invite into the play and experimentation of the space. And I really like this slide for all of the beautiful quotes my friend has told me. So that's all. Thank you.
There's one. Yes, exactly.
Okay. Thank you for powering through what has been, I think, great conversation about, everything urban. And I'm going to take us home on a similar vein about the urban practice. I can't see my slides here, so if I have a slide off, just, bear with me. So this thesis started as something else entirely. I came to this program wanting to understand mobility, about how people move to the city and how they shape public space. But the more I looked, the more I looked. What is okay. Okay. The more I looked, the more I realized that I was asking the wrong question. This was more a question on belonging and about who gets to be in public space, on what terms, and what happens when that right is threatened. That shift is where this thesis began, and that shift is where I would like to start. Before I do go any further, these are some photos from around my house back home in Mumbai. I am a South Asian woman that grew up with socioeconomic privilege in Mumbai, and the same privilege and my parents' financial support has brought me to New York City almost 2 years ago for this graduate program. Professionally, I'm an architect, a journalist, and now an urban planner. And across all of these roles, I have learned that access to spaces and communities is not something that is granted. It has to be earned over a long period of time through relationship and trust, as many of us have outlined in the previous presentations. So for a time-bound project like this matters. While I am deeply committed to my research, my visa status has been an undercurrent to my entire time in New York. And it comes through in this thesis as I try to understand what it means to participate in insurgency, whether it is through direct practice or through existence in a city that is asking the hard questions about who gets to belong. So before I get into my research questions, I want to explain what I mean by people's insurgent practice. It is the everyday acts through which communities are formally excluded from power, claim space, build belonging, and make themselves legible to a city that was not necessarily designed with them in mind. You see this in the community garden that appears on a vacant lot, in the mutual aid network that distributes food through the Washington Square Park and a WhatsApp chain, and in the street vendor who has spotted the safest profitable corner in the neighborhood, not because the planner identified it, but because their livelihood depends on it. And these are not marginal acts. They are the city working, but working in ways that the planning profession may not know how to see just yet. So this thesis proposes a framework for how designers can work with these practices rather than over them, which is what we're usually taught to do. And I am calling it designers' urban insurgent practice. Some of the questions that started this research is how do designers consciously participate in insurgent practices without institutionalizing them? But eventually this research ends with a different question, which I think is a more important contribution. Under what conditions can the design practice itself be insurgent rather than simply politically aligned with insurgents? That tension between participating and institutionalizing is pretty much the heart of everything that follows. The reason that this feels urgent right now in the New York City context is because of its sanctuary city status. New York has a policy commitment not to use municipal resources to enforce federal immigration law. Despite broader anti-immigration climate in the country, communities here have built their civic lives, their spatial practices, their networks of mutual support in the knowledge that the city was not going to hand them over to the feds. This protection is now under acute federal pressure, and what's at stake is not only a policy, but the condition under which people can be present in public space at all, visibly, safely, with the capacity to make claims in the city that we all live in, work in, and have built for decades. When that condition is threatened, the question of what designers can do and what designers should not do becomes impossible to avoid. The theoretical framework I'm bringing here is 6 major thinkers across disciplines, but I will move to them quickly because it is not their individual contribution that matters, but what they collectively provide for this body of work. Rita Fabra and David Harvey, which I think a lot of us have mentioned today, give me the foundation for this work, which is the people who produce the city have a right to shape it. That's the right to the city, and it's the most basic claim that this thesis is making. James Holston tells me that citizenship is not just a legal status, but also a struggle over rights and recognition that can play out through spatial practices. His work in Sao Paulo showed how communities that were formerly excluded from housing built a new kind of citizenship. Illegally, according to the law, they built it regardless. Farhana Miraftab gives me the concept of termite work, the idea that subordinate communities have been building insurgent infrastructures of resistance for a long period of time, and usually below the threshold of what formal planning knows how to see. Her framework is also what allows me to read everyday community practice as a political act rather than merely practical or survival. Fauna Foreman and Teddy Cruz gave me a model of what designer engagement with insurgent practice can look like. It can be relational, cross-institutional, and can enter communities as collaborators rather than design experts. And Solomon Benjamin's occupancy urbanism tells me that claiming space through use, presence, repetition, and collective building is a political act in itself. To understand what insurgent practice looks like across different conditions, I look beyond New York City. This is not a comparative study, but these urban situations are distinct conditions that together reveal different dimensions of the same concept. Insurgent practice looks different under different regulatory regimes, under different scales, in different relationships with the state. And that variation is what I wanted to understand. When you flip through my book that's somewhere circulating around, you will come across a detailed table that answers all of these for the urban situations that I've studied. But for the sake of time, I'm going to go through what is relevant for this thesis. The first situation is Sao Paulo, where James Holston and Teresa Caldera studied what happened on the city's urban peripheries, places where people build their own housing without permission on land that they didn't legally own. And because the formal city had no place for them. But what emerged from this illegality was not disorder, but a new form of citizenship. The land law that was meant to manage informal occupation didn't resolve any conflict. It simply found a new way of structuring it. And in doing so, it created the condition under which these peripheral communities could build participatory citizenship through this act of auto construction that they call it itself. This illegality then became an entry point to their urban belonging. The act of building without permission became their act of claiming. So what Sao Paulo tells me is that insurgent practice, yes, precedes and forces institutional recognition, and it is the state is eventually compelled to acknowledge them. The second situation is Dharavi in Mumbai. It's one of the world's oldest and most densely populated informal settlements, which has been continuously built over since the 1800s. By the time the state started trying to redevelop it, Dharavi was already one of the most economically significant neighborhoods in the city. Social and economic citizenship here had been built long before any legal recognition arrived. And the legal frameworks, when they did come, they came in the form of threat rather than an acknowledgement. One of the organizations that has been working in this settlement is SPART, the Society for the Promotion of Area Research Centers. And they were formed in 1984 to work with Mumbai's most vulnerable poor, but they are now a national organization. And in partnership with the National Slum Dwellers Federation and the Women's Cooperative Mahila Milan, they have called what I would call they have built what I would call an amorphous urban practice. They shift between advocacy, co-design, community organizing, depending on what the moment requires. Their work does not have a clean success story by conventional planning metrics. However, planning with insurgents in Mumbai, I would say, has neither succeeded nor failed in fighting institutional power. Dharavi will undergo redevelopment soon, as of August 2025, we know that for sure. But their practice persisted in the space between that redevelopment and collaboration. And what this showed me in this research that even the most sophisticated community grounded practice unfortunately had its own structural limits to what it could achieve. The third urban situation is Tijuana, where insurgent practice exceeded the nation state framework entirely, where Terry Cruz and Fauna Foreman work on the US-Mexico border region. These are just a couple of photos from the wall. The wall becomes solid literally in terms of concrete, it becomes porous, it becomes a lot of different materials that create a lot of different conditions in the way people interact with each other across the border. Geopolitical exclusion was eventually literally built into the landscape, but the border in itself became porous, which was made porous by the people that regularly transgressed it and who then contributed to the social fabric of this region. The community stations is a grand idea that spans a network of community stations, each one made in collaboration with a local partner organization, each one also being incrementally built, community-led, and functioned as civic infrastructure for that area. And the process that these were built is the point. It is a democratization of urbanization. It is a practice of making the city rather than receiving it for what it is. And crucially, it does not pretend that the border does not exist, but it tries to build and work within that contradiction. So what Ivana ended up telling me was that design practice can be genuinely insurgent when it follows community knowledge rather than directing it, and when it uses institutional access more strategically to access resources. Now back to New York. What this city's history shows is that when it's read through this lens, insurgent practice has always preceded institutional recognition. The community gardens of the Lower East Side emerged from urban abandonment of lots in the 1970s and 80s, and residents cultivating these vacant city-owned lots without permission much before the Government Green Thumb Act was introduced. The 2021 street vending reform was the product of years of insurgent organizing by vendor associations that worked alongside and on behalf of the communities that have been navigating this illegality. Each of these examples follows the same pattern where community practice has built something that the formal city has not provided. It generally tries to persist under pressure and eventually forces a response from the institution. The framework that I am presenting has three orientations. These are not necessarily steps, but they're ways of locating yourself, a designer, that is in relation to what the communities are doing. The first is relational knowledge sharing. This means treating the spatial and organizational knowledge that communities have already produced as the primary research instead of background research. In practice, in New York City, this means developing tools for listening that don't necessarily create records, because we are in a time where documenting ethnicities, demographics can be vulnerable. Organizations like Make Your Own New York are already doing this through Know Your Rights workshops that transfer this knowledge without producing documentation that can be accessed by people who access it. The second is cooperative production, not just of the space, but of the terms on which it is produced. Who sets the agenda, who owns the outcome, who is visible, who is vulnerable, are now design questions and not just pre-questions. The street vendor project's work in 2021 is a great example of co-production that led to policy. And the third is a different kind of recognition, not institutional acknowledgement, but the capacity to see people's insurgent practice for what it is and protect it rather than improve it. In a moment where visibility is a risk, recognition sometimes means deliberately not amplifying. The full framework proposes 8 points towards a new urban insurgent practice. The 3 orientations I've just described. 2 modes of engagement, which is to support, which asks the designer to be present without directing, and to amplify, which means taking existing community practices and making them more durable to stand the test of time. And then it has values, actions, and limitations, because any framework, according to me, that doesn't name its own limits can risk becoming a professional absolution than an actual practice. The limitation that I most directly want to name is that designers' urban insurgent practice does rely on decentralized control. It requires long-term commitment that project-based practice does not support as of this moment. And it operates outside the metrics that institutions use to measure success. These are not problems to be solved, they just get taken as conditions for this practice. And I want to close this with what this thesis leaves open, because whether this kind of designer that this thesis describes, someone who hugs contestation as a productive force, who measures success by the durability of community capacity rather than the completion of a project, can exist within the professional frameworks that currently structure the urban planning practice is a question that I cannot answer. But it is the more urgent question that we as a profession now face. The research is also ongoing and unintentionally unresolved, because resolution would be absolute. And from everything that this thesis has shown me, insurgent practices cannot and should not be made absolute. The push-pull that happened in that dynamic is the point. And the question is whether we are willing to stay inside it.
No, after you. All right, well, thank you. First of all, congratulations to all of you. This has been really has been an incredible day. I don't need to close it. I just to say it's been an incredible day, and my head is full of your ideas. But it's also interesting because I read them just 2 or 3 days ago, and now I see things that I have not read and not ever heard before. So there is an element of surprise in the presentations as well. So we collectively, the 3 of us agree that we're going to call this panel the insurgent group. Because there's a groove and there's insurgency, so like it was like, where do you put the adjective when you put the noun? So my question, I would love to hear from, of course, from the audience, but my question for both of you is, I have 2 questions, one impossible, one funny. So the funny one, how do you find the insurgency in Molly's, and how do you find the groove in Shivani's?
Actually thought about this. Okay, when Antonia and Bruce were presenting, and there was a comment about the combining thread that is through their work, and I was thinking about our panel, and I think the simplest thought that I have is that groove in itself becomes an insurgence when it is acted upon in like a formal sense, either a formal like space or anything that is designed in that sense. Anything that people do that is against that design is insurgence. and groove.
Yeah.
And I feel like that would be one, I think, the first thread to start thinking about.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, I have a part in my writing, part of the thesis that I frame group as the collectivity in the impasse, because there is no credible future, and so like people make a group together and people make a group that then move together too. So I think that's, and I think to answer, to do the reverse, I feel like how it's insurgent groovy, is, I think, okay, so what group to me and also for all of the dancers and musicians, if you ask any of them, the groove is something different from rhythm, it really lives in the body, it's the bodily feel of the rhythm. And, so it happens in the body, and I think for insurgents, it's people's bodily response to want to start something, and people's like, the like, kind of like the authentic part of their living in the city or like living in the system comes out, and that authenticity from the body location takes over and then as maybe counter practice for insurgents and that. I think that.
And the second impossible question, both we talk, everybody talks about design, both we talk about design, which I think is necessary. And generally speaking, I would say in both of your presentations and your thesis, you frame design as necessary but insufficient. Right, so there is a certain thing that designers, which is where my question is going. Designers provide, which could be somewhat of a structure for a free play in some cases, whether it's insurgency of dance or whatever it is, implementation of edges, to take place. Both are necessary. And whether the play, I don't mean to say that play is mutual aid, but certainly it is, as you indicated in both of yours and previous, it is certainly a response to a structural condition which is unjust and unfair and creates the conditions for then these responses to emerge. I mean, who had the diagram with Delaney had a diagram with blocks, right? So you see exactly where the block associations emerge is in areas that were redlined before. So you see that direct causality, right? So in your understanding of design or designer better, so who are these designers? This is what I'm just trying to figure out. Who designs?
I feel like I know the answer. I think I know.
We spent some time together.
The answer behind this question, but I feel like I think the framing of the design. I believe that everybody has the power to design for a better life of their own, and I feel like I think for the edge framework I'm doing. I feel like for primary edge and secondary edge, that part of the design probably the decision is that for like more so the decision making of it, probably the institution has more say in that. And but like the tertiary edge, which is why I usually framed it that way, because both young adult and in Angel's work, he had the primary and secondary, he didn't have the church. So I think that is one of my stance in trying to bring that in.
Exactly. That's fun.
You have asked me this question so many times. And my issue is that I don't think I've ever had an answer, even though I've been trained as an architect and a designer. And every single time I have approached a research topic, I have realized that the definition of designer that I had in my head is not appropriate for the research that I'm conducting. And I feel like in so much of what I have thought about and written, I keep refining that definition to fit what needs to, I guess, be the outcome. even in this book, there's a definitions page and there is a designer definition in it because it is so specific to this context where I have said that yes, they need formal training because I think like that comes with, I've said, institutional power, but at the same time, when it comes to this particular research, which is insurgent practice, it's easy to not tread the line, to not tread the line between what you impose as a designer and versus what you learn as a designer. I will have an answer for you at some point in my
The thing is that it's a lifelong project, and I don't know if I'm gonna be around. But go for it, go for it, go for it. Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, so this is for Molly. I actually work at Robert Clemente sometimes as part of like my gardening job. And so, yeah, I feel like my coworkers, it's a large collection of like queer white people and then also like Black people from the Bronx. So it's like very different opinions. And I feel like the white people in my group are like, oh, this is so upsetting that it's all fenced off, da 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 da. And my Black coworkers were like, no, this is great. This is much better. It used to be horrible. Like it used to be really scary to work here because of the needles. And now it's super easy. And so, yeah, it's just interesting to hear like that reflection from the residents as well. And I'm just wondering if you came up against any, or if you found any other public spaces like Roberto Clemente that had such hostile or like basic or just like exclusionary features that were actually preferred by the neighborhood, or if you like found any sort of more long-term features or any ideas for like more long-term features for Roberto Clemente. So it's not just like that weird fence.
Yeah, totally. I think, yeah, that's so great. I should ask you about this. Too. Like I saw this is so interesting because I saw the fences. I was like, this is terrible. And then I asked around and the people I asked, they were like, I think all of the 5 residents I asked were people of color, local folks in the neighborhood and the neighborhood. And they all said, this is great. Finally, I'm able to traverse just to pass here. So, and to the question, have I found anything else? I think this is probably the sharpest example of that. It's directly in the picture. But like, I think the insight that's providing with that this offers is the like different edges to different kinds of work. And I think it's important for us to not assuming secondary edges is always better, or like that large open spaces is always better for whatever kind of neighborhood to serve. Because sometimes, you know, it might pose more challenges to an already vulnerable neighborhood, and it's just going to add more load on the already very thin capacity for the neighborhood's public space. And I think just like adding to that stress, it's like something you're finding like when they're making this situation.
I think there's one element to this that those of us in this room who don't live in New York and do not necessarily study how city works, that you just get photographs of the plazas and it's like, well, so what? A couple of chairs, people sitting there, a couple of trees, maybe one tree, But in fact, it's the complexity of the way in which this public realm of the city is produced that has triggered in a way these very complex responses, and your real genuine struggle and attempt to understand, and then in face of it even propose what to do next, like the 8 points, right? So congratulations to both of you. It's very complex work. Any other questions? Do we have time for one more? I think Nikhil wants to ask something.
Yes.
He's looking like he wants to say something.
Yes.
No, but no, I do. I'm like super happy always at these moments. It's just really incredible how we saw you when you started and how you're living, and hopefully just living the buildings. Right? I mean, not the community that you created. But it's yeah, it's so gratifying to see this. I mean, I love how the setup was organized, you know, from the dirty hands, you know, projects that we began with. I mean, like getting yourself like really involved to the other very important, you know, side, which is the Theoretica. That's how we, you know, ended up with a thesis. And this gives, I guess, testament of the incredible breadth of work that the program has generated over the years, because it really has touched everything. I'm still very surprised. Every single thesis is just so unique because you actually put your heart in it, and because it's not, you know, that this is your future, right? And it's not, you know, just a passing grade or just to get a title. I think by now you all kind of understand. With that said, all the professors have agreed to fail you because we want you back. We were just talking about this. No, I want to say this, I mean, and especially this group, because I'm very attracted to theoretical arguments, but I also get my hands very dirty, as you guys know, and it's, I mean, Shivani, Gabriela and I just finished a book where right now it's in final process of design, sending to the printers. It ends up with 11 points for, you know, the future practice, and I saw in your thesis you have the 8 points, you know, and it's just so nice that there's a whole generation that is thinking beyond this. And for Molly, I mean, what can I say? I mean, like, I never had doubts, but I was just like, oh my God, what is Molly gonna get herself into? And even you went into Richard Sennett and so on, which you saw me have a debate recently with him and so on. It is really incredible how you have brought your own and actually come really close to the theorization of the city in terms of contradictions, right? For our language, as a Marxist professor, we talk about contradictions all the time. And in your case, you talk about group, right? And it is so important to translate this to other praxis and to other realms, right? Because otherwise it does not stay. But basically, yeah, you comrade completely, you know, like I think you have understood by you embodying it, what is it about, right? This is about the production of contradictions, right? And it's not just, I mean, you said it absolute, you know, what you said, you know, and then so, yeah, and to the rest, my God. Yes, I can't say so many things, but thank you.
Daniel wants to say something about tomorrow because
Yes.
Yes.
First of all, congratulations to Jimmy and Megan for this. Faculty members that are here, Rob, Eric, Tom, Lynn, I don't know if someone else here is from the program or again. Yeah, no, Eric is there. For this like a team effort, and I'm so glad that the first year students are also here because it is really a process, and I start with them in Studio One, so just seeing the evolution of each of you and your own interests is just so amazing, so rewarding. And I'm not going to talk much today because I want to invite you all tomorrow. We are going to meet here at 2 p.m. To take the last pictures, all dressed up and happy. Before you head out to the ceremony, the SDS ceremony. And so yeah, we will have a few words also with you. Yeah, just be in a more relaxed setting, you know, because I know that all of you were like very nervous for today. And yeah, tomorrow we are going to conclude celebrating, and then in the big auditorium after celebrating here in our small family, you know. Yeah, that's all. So I welcome you all tomorrow at 2 here. So, and if I'm a little bit late, my son is graduating. In another building, so I will run, but my colleagues are going to be here too. But
Great request to come up front for a group photo.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, it has been wonderful working with all of you. Congratulations. We are waiting for the final submission things, but not forget some. And we're celebrating our things away.
to the happy for the pillars. Yes, pillars that we could create. Pillars.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Where are we?
Close to the, come this way, just, so I make a semi-circle.
You know what? Hold on, you like.
Hey, Rich Gathering. That's a good view.
We can do more.
I'm saying that you may redo the. Yeah, wait for it. That's that makes sense, honey? When they're doing it.